The Ashanti Empire on the Gold Coast of Africa was a big deal way back in the 17th century, in what's now Ghana. The Ashanti Kingdom sprang up in the late 1600s, right around when the Ashanti first met Europeans for the first time. The Ashanti Kingdom's existence wasn't widely known until around 1698, during its war with the Denkyera. Soon after, its prosperity and strength became well known to Europeans. Arab traders also became aware of Asante around this time. However, the first written record of interactions between the Europeans and Ashanti people was made by the Director General of the Dutch Trading Company, known as Jan Pieter Theodore Heidkaper, in 1816. This is the story of one of the richest and most powerful empires in pre-colonial Africa. The Asante nation we know today was a strong society made up of 24 individual states, each with its own chief, serving one king, known as the Asantehene. At its height, the Ashanti Empire was made up of more than 3 million people and had its own highly sophisticated social, political, and military institutions. The people of Ashanti formed part of an ethnic group known as the Akan, who spoke the Twi language. Other Ghanaian tribes who belong to the Akan ethnic group include the Fantes, the Bonos, the Akwamas, the Akiums, the Wassas, the Odonsis, the Denkyera, and the Asins. The foundation of the Ashanti Kingdom can be traced back to the late 17th century with its rise as a military power under the leadership of its first Asantehene, Otutu, and his powerful priest, known as Okomfo Anokai. The Asantehene is the title given to both the monarch of the historical Ashanti Empire and the ceremonial ruler of the Ashanti people today. With the ambition of freeing the Asante people from the dominance and servitude of the paramount Denkyera tribe, Otutu and his powerful priest brought all the independent chiefdoms together to form the strongest political and military force along the coast. In the Ashanti Empire, tributary states were ruled by their own chiefs or kings, but they knew that if they stepped out of line, the Asantehene would come down hard on them. As the first Asantehene or king of the Ashanti Kingdom, Otutu has always held a special place in Ghana's history. The first king of the Ashanti Kingdom's most significant creation was the Golden Stool, which he claimed represented the ancestors of all the Ashanti people. Otutu used this stool to legitimize his rule and that of his royal dynasty. According to Asante tradition, this wooden stool covered in gold was summoned from the heavens by Anokai the priest and descended on the lap of Otutu, who was soon after anointed king. Anokai the priest also declared that the golden stool contained the spirits of the Ashanti ancestors and the strength and well-being of the new kingdom depended on its preservation. Every member of the Ashanti Kingdom, as well as all the heads of each of the 24 tribes, had to show allegiance to the Golden Stool and its guardian, the Asantehene, the head of the nation. The Golden Stool was so revered that nobody, even to this day, is allowed to sit on the Golden Stool, not even the king himself. A new king would be lowered over it, but never permitted to sit on it. It was too holy of an object for any man to sit upon. The Golden Stool couldn't even touch the ground. It would always be carried or placed on another stool, chair, or table. Very few people have actually laid their eyes on it. After entering the region, the British quickly learned about the Golden Stool. Throughout the many attempts to colonize the Ashanti people, the British tried their best to get a hold of this stool. That's because the Golden Stool was believed to contain the soul of the Ashanti people, and it was thought that if the stool disappeared, so would the nation. Despite their efforts, they were unable to obtain the stool. The British lack of understanding regarding the paramount importance of the Golden Stool was one of the main reasons for the breakout of the Anglo-Ashanti War of 1900. Now, let's talk a little more about King Otutu, the very first Asantehene of the Ashanti Kingdom. King Otutu was an autocrat, at least to the public. The king held multiple roles in the government. He was the chief executive, the commander-in-chief of the army, and the highest judge. As per the Ashanti constitution, only he had the authority to order executions. In reality, however, the king's powers were significantly limited. King Otutu liked to project authority in public, but when it came to important matters for the Ashanti state, he shared power with a national assembly of around 200 men. This assembly oversaw government affairs and acted as a supreme court for resolving disputes. The king also received guidance, sometimes even being overshadowed, by an inner council of 18 nobles. This council was made up of influential figures such as powerful military leaders, princes, key government officials like the treasurer, ceremonial officers, two of the king's chamberlains, the head physician, a senior priest, and most importantly, the Queen Mother, who often held the most sway and power in this council. The council, known as the Ashanti Kotoko, was also nicknamed the Ashanti Porcupine because they were simply untouchable. The Ashanti king owed his throne to the group that helped him gain power. He had to keep them happy to stay in charge, while also not upsetting other influential groups, including nobles and royal family members. Aside from the council, the king also had to maintain his respect for the four big-shot noble families of the kingdom. Apart from the king and his council, these four families had the most power in the kingdom. They couldn't be executed for crimes, and one of them ran things when the king was away from Kumasi. A smart king would do anything to keep these noble families happy. A story is told that at one point, Otutu caught his wife cheating. As the most powerful man in the land, he was ready to have her executed as the law allowed. But when he was reminded by the council members that the cheating wife was from a powerful family, he changed his mind and even gave her gold as a wedding gift if she chose to get married again. Despite the obvious limitations to the king's power, Ashanti kings lived lavishly in their grand palaces, surrounded by a battalion of servants ready to cater to their every wish. The king's entourage included a variety of people who served different roles, including spokesmen, stool carriers, drummers, umbrella carriers, bathroom attendants, fan bearers, and of course, executioners who were on standby ready to perform an execution at the king's orders. As you can expect from a powerful African leader, the king also had a lot of wives. Wives of the king were incredibly secluded. Apart from the king and a few eunuchs, no one was allowed to see the 6 or so wives who lived in the royal palace at any given time. His other wives lived in seclusion away from the palace. Apart from his wives, the Asantehene also kept lots of concubines in Kumasi. The first Asantehene of the kingdom, Otutu, made Kumasi his capital. In Kumasi, the center of Asante authority, political talk was common as people sought favor and status. But speaking recklessly could lead to swift downfall. Indeed, there's even an Ashanti proverb that states, "Words are like vomit, they cannot be taken back." In Kumasi, talent could also push someone up the ranks, but it could also result in a rapid fall from grace. In Kumasi and other central areas, there were always police forces to keep things in order. Ashanti law was strict, and the sight of executioners all over the city reminded everyone to follow it. This was very deliberate. If you broke a law, you could expect someone to report you, so justice was quick and effective in the Ashanti Kingdom. There were also uniformed police in Kumasi who maintained order and made certain that no one entered or left the city without the permission of the government. Sometimes as many as 600 police would man checkpoints on the Ashanti border, where they interrogated all travelers about their business, inspected their goods for contraband, enforced trade embargoes, and collected toll fees. Many smugglers or escaped criminals were arrested at these very checkpoints. No one passed these police posts without careful scrutiny. This is how organized Kumasi society was, despite the claims of colonial Britain, who often stated that they invaded the region because they wanted to end savagery and bring peace into the region. Religion was another huge aspect of life in Kumasi. The Ashanti had a diverse religion, recognizing a top god and many lesser ones who were quite involved in human life. The river god Tano was one of the most influential among them. Priests are said to have drawn their power from Moesha, forest dwarfs who looked like tiny humans but communicated through whistling and had backward-pointing feet. While human sacrifice and sacred objects were part of Ashanti religion, they didn't define it entirely. The Ashanti religion revolved around the idea that everyone had an immortal soul. After death, the soul turned into a spirit, which could potentially harm the living if the person died early or unnaturally. However, most ancestors peacefully transitioned to the underworld, living a similar life to their earthly one. This was one of the reasons why a wife sometimes demanded to be sacrificed after her husband's death. These ancestors were thought to join forces with other supernatural powers to reward people who followed the Asante values and laws and to punish offenders. It was thought that eventually a person's soul would be reborn through a woman of its own lineage. As you can see, religion held a lot of sway in the state, but the British didn't see it that way. When they colonized the Ashanti, the British dismissed all Ashanti religious stuff as fetish, borrowing the term from the Portuguese. They actually mocked it, suggesting it was just superstitious nonsense. As you can imagine, this made the locals want to fight against the British even more. The Gold Coast of Ghana wasn't called the Gold Coast for nothing. This region earned its name for a reason. When the Portuguese sailors landed in Ghana back in the 15th century, they hit the jackpot. Between the Ankobra and Volta rivers, they found so much gold that they couldn't believe their luck. In awe of their findings, they named the area Mina, which means mine. This wealth of gold in the soil led to the region being named the Gold Coast by English colonizers. With so much gold available, it makes sense that gold was the backbone of the Ashanti Empire's economy. In addition to the army, the Ashanti Empire's natural gold resources in its soil and forests brought unbelievable wealth and power to the Ashanti people. Under Otutu's rule, gold mines became royal property, and gold dust became the main currency. People, even those with little, used gold dust to decorate their stuff. That's how much gold there was in the Ashanti Empire. By law, all gold belonged to the king, and some mines were directly managed by the treasury, but others were under local control. When a nugget was found, it was supposed to be taken to the local chief, who sent it on to the king, who in return sent the chief some gold dust as his commission. There were strict rules surrounding the mining of gold, and the chiefs had spies to catch any wrongdoing. Another source of the Ashanti Kingdom's power was its military and the warfare that the kingdom waged across the territory. The Ashanti men lived for war. Many senior Ashanti military commanders were men who longed for the military action that could bring them glory, wealth, and power. In the early 19th century, the king only kept a small force of a few hundred soldiers as royal guards. Later on, additional guard units, a medical corps, a drum company, and about 1,000 war messengers were established. These messengers, known as couriers, played a crucial role in rapidly communicating information during battles. At its maximum, the Asante army was said to have been up to 100,000 strong. This may sound small, but it wasn't. Most armies back then were not as large as this. The bulk of the army was made up of slaves or freemen who owed allegiance to their chiefs or district kings. Chiefs or district kings could call them to war, with quotas based on the situation and time of year. Chiefs from places like Dwaban or Bekwi could gather over 10,000 fighters at a moment's notice if required. Chiefs who didn't send troops when asked could face punishment, even a military strike from the king's army. But it was not just fear that led to cooperation. For many powerful men, war was the royal road to glory and riches. A successful war campaign could lead to great amounts of booty in the form of gold, guns, gunpowder, captives, and land. In principle, all war booty belonged to the king, but he usually returned at least 2/3 of it to his commanders, who in turn shared it with those loyal to them. The general Amankwatia III, for example, who led the Ashanti army to victory in 1803, was given the town of Shreso, 7 miles from Kumasi, with nearly all of its 8,000 inhabitants as his personal soldiers, slaves, or retainers. As brave and loyal as most Asante generals were, there were occasional exceptions. It was not unusual for high-ranking officers to be tried and executed for cowardice. In battle, the Ashanti soldiers were so ruthless that they grew to be greatly feared by other West African states and well respected by the British. Their brutality knew no bounds. They often killed women and children, and enemy chiefs were sometimes tortured to death, their bodies dismembered before being distributed, much as an animal killed by a hunter would be. As evidence of Asante victory, the jaws of the slain enemies were taken back to Kumasi, where they were displayed in the palace. As the soldiers marched into the city, their senior officers led the way, proudly displaying hundreds of jaws taken from their enemies. Legend has it that, during one battle, when they didn't have enough jaws to show their victory properly, they would use some of the jaws collected from previous battles to make their entrance in Kumasi look triumphant enough. Clearly, clout chasing has always been a part of history. The decision to declare war was only made by the king. But he would consult his privy council as well as the chiefs of the 24 individual states that made up the nation. The success, or not, of a war campaign would either increase or reduce the king's reputation or position. Another remarkable aspect that contributed to the greatness of the Ashanti army was its effective utilization of guns during warfare. Muskets were quite common, at least along the West African coast. The British started selling guns along the Gold Coast of Africa as early as 1646. From 1870 to 1872, as the Asante prepared for impending war with the British, they purchased over 18,000 muskets and 29,000 kegs of gunpowder. So when it came to defeat, the Asante problem was not the availability of guns and gunpowder, but their poor quality. These low-quality weapons would be sold in this state on purpose by the British. Despite the poor quality of weapons, the Asante army was a formidable force to be feared. Another extremely unique thing about the Ashanti army during this period is that it was also one of the only ones to have a corps of medical orderlies who would accompany the army. This medical corps would attend to wounded troops, as well as removing the dead from the battlefield. If war was declared, the chiefs would return to their lands and call people to arms. Every male citizen was a soldier, and all able-bodied men were expected to ready themselves for military service. However, a quota system was used so that only a small portion of the men were called for action while the remainder was left at home. These men were left behind to provide security as well as manpower to ensure that the farming systems continue and that future famines were avoided. There was a large element of discipline, even subjugation, that was used to maintain the effectiveness of the army. There were severe punishments, including death for failure to report for duty. From 1807 to 1900, the British fought many times against the Ashanti army, and in several instances, the Ashanti army came out the clear winners. This made the Ashanti army the only West African army to defeat the British in more than one battle. In what seemed like an impossible achievement, the Ashanti army actually defeated the British in a total of 3 wars. In the end, however, these victories were not enough. The Ashanti Kingdom eventually faced a series of defeats against the British, which gradually weakened and diminished its territory. Finally, in the Fourth War with the British, they were defeated and were made to sign a treaty. Despite nearly a century of resistance, the Ashanti Kingdom was declared a crown colony in 1902 after the end of the Yarasantua War uprising. Though the British ruled the Gold Coast, including the Ashanti Empire, for years, their reign did not last forever. In 1957, the British colony of the Gold Coast became the independent nation of Ghana. This was such a big deal for the continent because it inspired other African countries to fight for independence too. Around this same time in 1957, Kwame Nkrumah was installed as the very first president of Ghana. But just because there was a new type of modern administration in the region didn't mean that the Ashanti kings disappeared. As the modern nation of Ghana began to take shape, the administrative region of Ashanti was formed in the old imperial heartland, with Kumasi as its capital. There, the kings could continue many of their customs in peace. Upon independence, Asantehene Prempeh II would become the first Ashanti ruler to reign in a country free of British influence. Power passed peacefully to his successor in 1970, and in 1999, to Otutu II. Otutu II is the 16th and current Asantehene of Ashanti. The Golden Stool, the Ashanti Imperial Palace, and artifacts at the Museum of National Culture in Kumasi are today celebrated as lasting symbols of Ghana's famous past. So, Ghanaians, did we leave anything out? Please tell us in the comments, so that we can learn some more about this amazing African kingdom that isn't frequently taught in schools or talked about. That's all we have to share today as far as the ancient Ashanti Kingdom is concerned. Thanks so much for watching, and please do not hesitate to tell us about an African history topic that you would like to see talked more about.